Hey everybody, welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep 'em flying.
Well, good evening, airplane fans, and welcome to CAF Warbird Tube for tonight. This is episode number 192, and we revisit AirCorps with Ester Aube and meet Ken Jungeberg, the man who rescued an enormous library of North American aviation materials. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But first, let's get the business out of the way, right? If you are joining us for the first time or you're a loyal Warbird Tube fan, we're thrilled to have you with us tonight. If you enjoy what you see tonight, please don't forget to spread it across your social media platforms. We enjoy having more folks join us and to share in the fun that we have here at Warbird Tube. Now, Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. If you'd like to find out more about the CAF, our events, our aircraft, tours, local units, or best of all, how you can be a part of the fun, just visit our website, commemorativeairforce.org. Now, as you're watching tonight, you might have some questions. If you do, just type something in the chat box and we'll compile the questions. We'll either try to answer them during the presentation or we'll save time at the end to make sure we clear up all of your questions. So if there's something you're thinking of, got a question, got a thought, go ahead and share it with us. We love to talk with our guests, but we also love to interact with you as well. And we're very pleased to have you with us here on Warbird Tube. And with no further ado, let's bring in Ester and Ken. We'll talk a little bit about this enormous collection of materials from North American Aviation. And Ken, actually, we're going to start with you and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in aviation.
Well, as you can see on the slide there, passion for aviation at 3 years old, and that's pretty much correct. And I need to kind of preface this with a little psychology I learned from talk radio, and I heard that sometimes your earliest childhood memory can be very significant. Whatever event that memory is of, either good or bad, can come back and have an influence on your emotions and your behavior and even your adult life. So thinking about that, my earliest childhood memory involved the airplane there in the upper left-hand corner, and it revolves around an event that I went to where I saw that airplane, but my memory was not about the airplane directly. My earliest childhood memory was me sitting down at our kitchen table trying to draw that airplane. And I distinctly remember trying to draw an airplane with little globs on the end of the wing and so on. And I wasn't even 3. I was like almost 3 years old. But the event that I had been at was the Cleveland National Air Races. My father had taken me to the 1949 Cleveland National Air Races, and I saw that airplane. Air race fans may recognize it as being the Beguine, a modified P-51C. And I happened to see it at the air races. I don't remember that, but I do remember trying to draw that airplane on a piece of paper, and my dad looking over my shoulder and saying, "Hey, that's pretty good." So at that point in time, I set in my mind somehow that aviation is a good thing. And it did kind of set me on a track to building model airplanes for my whole childhood, it seems, and even through high school, graduating to the balsa wood and tissue airplanes and so on. But that was kind of my life for many years. If you want to go to the next slide here.
Sure.
Not surprisingly, I went to college and got my degree in aeronautical engineering at Ohio State University, and my first job was at North American Aviation in Columbus, Ohio. And that's a picture before you there of the Columbus plant, probably in its heyday, maybe the late 50s or early 60s, a few years before my time. But they built a lot of airplanes there, and probably the one they built the most of was the F-86 Sabre jet and its Navy lookalike, the FJ2, FJ3, FJ4 Fury jet. And that's what they did there at Columbus for many years. Now, it was somewhat of a declining mode when I got to North American and Columbus, but nonetheless, they had a lot of interesting projects that I worked on there. And if you go to the next slide, I'll show you some of the airplanes that I worked on and why they're significant to my life. The OV-10D was one of the first airplanes that I actually worked on, and I hired in as a designer and even as a degreed engineer. When you hired in, you started on the drafting board. So I was working on a drafting board, helping to design the OV-10D. Like I say, is one of the first ones. That's the version with the extended nose and the infrared FLIR turret underneath the nose there. But that's what I did. And it does kind of harken back to my earliest childhood memory of me sitting at a table drawing a North American Aviation airplane, and my first career job was sitting at a drafting table drawing a North American Aviation airplane. So there may be something to what that psychologist said. I don't know. But another interesting aspect about working on the drafting board was that when I worked at North American, the years that I was there, those were the years where the aerospace industry was transitioning from the drafting board design work to the computer. And it was, to me, it was fun being part of that transition, actually, helping to integrate the computer-aided design into the, design of airplanes. And I know that sounds pretty ho-hum to most people, but to an engineer, that's about as exciting as it gets. Another airplane that really was significant to me was the XFV-12A, and not many people have heard of that because it was a one-of-a-kind prototype, and honestly, it was a failure, just to be totally honest. I considered it a marvel of engineering and kinematics, and if you look at it, it truly was, because the vertical lift devices that it was really striving for were a whole series of blown flaps and nozzles that diverted the exhaust from the engine into these augmenters for lifting the airplane vertically off the ground, and those never worked. But like I said, it was a mechanical marvel in my eyes. And the good thing about it for me was it was an airplane that I actually was associated with clear from preliminary design through design development and actually building hardware. So to me, that was the whole aeronautical engineering thing in that airplane for me. I'm showing the Space Shuttle Orbiter there. We built some chunks of that at Columbus, and I really didn't have too much to do with those, but they came up with a little side job, a little side hustle, if you will, that Columbus had to actually generate some coordinate data for inspecting the tiles on the space shuttle. And you'll remember that the leading edge surfaces, the underside surfaces are all covered with a bunch of little tiles, because of the heat of reentry, to insulate from the heat of reentry. And we had the job at Columbus of generating a bunch of coordinate data, inspection data for inspecting those tiles. We didn't build them, but we generated that data. And that data was generated by the Master Dimensions group, which I'll talk about a little more in a minute, but it was a group that really controls the geometry of the air vehicle. They define it, they disseminate it to everybody who needs that surface and other geometric data. And so they were in charge of the generating these inspection data points, and they didn't have enough people. They grabbed a bunch of designers, and I was one of them. So I went over to the Master Dimensions group and worked several weeks just cranking out XYZ coordinates for all these tiles. And a funny thing happened several weeks into the project. The head of the Master Dimensions department quit and went to work at another company. His second in command took over, and after about 2 or 3 weeks, he did the same thing. They looked around and they said, let's make Ken Jungeberg the head of the Master Dimensions department. So that's how I worked my way into that job, and that's that's where I stayed through the rest of my career at North American Aviation in the Master Dimensions department. But it worked out well for me. I have kind of a 3D mind, and the math and the high-level programming that were required, I knew that pretty well. So it was a good job that I enjoyed. And when the B-1B program, if you look at that picture in the upper right-hand corner, when that launched, that's where I was in Master Dimensions. So I pretty much supported that program from the Master Dimensions department. Now, Columbus built the nacelles and a couple big chunks of the intermediate fuselage on that airplane. It was we didn't do final assembly, but it was final assembled in Palmdale, California. But that airplane was really the swan song of the Columbus division, if you will. We had to build 100 ship sets of B-1B components, and when that was done, we proceeded to close down the plant.
Yeah.
And if you'll go to the next slide, then.
Well, before we go, I've got a couple of questions on this. When you started with North American, you said you were using pencil and paper and drafting, and then moved to computer-aided design. How long was that transition from, let's call it the old school way of pen and paper, to the new age of computers? How long did that transition take?
I would say it was probably a good 3 or 4 years, because people had been experimenting. In the late 70s, there were CAD systems out there that were honestly more like a digital Etch-a-Sketch, if you will. And the software itself gradually, transitioned from Etch-a-Sketch, just pictures, to 2D, to 2.5D, to 3D, to solid modeling. So the software was developing too. And really it wasn't until we got into 3D modeling and solid modeling before it really made an impact on the industry. So we were kind of, coasting along with it. And honestly, we first implemented CAD on the B-1B bomber, and that was in the early 80s. So it was probably a good 5 years before, we actually were using it on a real airplane. And even at that, the B-1B was done partly on the drafting board and partly on CAD. And I know other companies were doing the same sort of thing, just integrating it kind of slowly.
And working on the XFV from start to finish, and you said it was a failure, but what did you learn from that made it not a failure in your mind, or things that could be applied to other aircraft?
I learned how to design and build airplanes. Okay. That's what I learned, because like I say, I started in preliminary design and ended up actually supporting the shop as they put this prototype together. So it was more of a structural, how do you build airplanes lesson. But it was a good one. It truly was, to see the whole process from, very start to actually an airplane sitting there. And
how do you feel today if you see a B-1 or the OV-10 or any of the other aircraft that you may have been a part of working on? I mean, do you have a little sense of pride that says, I did that?
Honestly, I do. That's part of the pleasure of a design type job where you're actually contributing to the final product. I'll be honest. I do have just a sense of pride. Like, part of that is me flying through the air. And I love the B-1. To me, it's a beautiful airplane. And I don't know if you remember, but the founder of our company, or one of the founders, Dutch Kindelberger, said, in order to fly well, an airplane has to look good. And I think that was a little tongue in cheek. I think he really was saying, in order to sell well, an airplane has to look good. But I still appreciate a nice looking airplane, and I think the B-1 is that airplane.
I agree.
I'm sorry, Esther, did I interrupt you? Did you have something?
No, I didn't put it in the presentation, but there's a really great picture that Ken shared with me of in the 80s, or maybe it's in the 90s. It's him at Oshkosh. There's a B-1, and he's got his hand up on the underside. He's touching one of the parts that he designed for the B-1. I should have thrown that in there, but
That was actually, that was not a B1. That was an OV-10, I think.
Oh, okay.
It was. So at any rate, here I was talking about closing down the Columbus plant. And by the way, that's a picture of me in the upper left-hand corner receiving some kind of a zero defects award or something. But the interesting thing is it's me in my 1976 three-piece suit receiving an award in 1985. I was a little bit of an out of date even then. But the picture in the lower right-hand corner is a picture of the engineering vault, which was where we, a very controlled place, very climate-controlled and lock and key controlled place, where they kept the originals of all the drawings that we produced. And that was one of the things that had to be cleaned out as we prepared to leave the factory. And the interesting thing about that vault was that they not only had all the drawings in there that had been produced at Columbus, but oddly, and still not totally certain why, but a bunch of drawings from the Los Angeles division from World War II era also ended up in the Columbus engineering vault. And a lot of us designers knew about that because occasionally somebody from the release group who controlled the engineering vault would bring up one of these drawings. In fact, I remember there was an inboard profile of a P-51 that one of the guys used to bring up and show the designers, and we kind of oohed and ahed over it. So we knew there were some of these old drawings there. And when they started to clean out the drawing in preparation for moving, they separated drawings into two categories. The newer drawings, they packed, they took out of all the tubes that they were stored in and packed them up in crates and shipped them out to Los Angeles. The older drawings, they put them in a room and prepared as they collected them to burn them ultimately. And that troubled me greatly when I found out that they were taking these old World War II North American Aviation engineering drawings and were going to burn them. And there was no complete airplane's worth of drawings there in the vault, but there was a smattering of drawings from the P-51, the B-25, the P-82, the AT-6, some T-28 drawings, and so on. So there was a nice collection of some very interesting drawings, in fact, of these airplanes. And I just could not fathom the idea that they were going to burn these things. I wasn't sure how much of a value they had for, say, the restoration community and so on, but I at least knew they had a historical value. So when I found out about that they were planning on burning these things, I sent a letter to the person who was in charge of the cleanout operation at Columbus, telling him, I don't think these things should be destroyed. They should be saved for at least historical purposes. And if you can't find, a proper place, I am certainly willing to take these things and become caretaker for them. I will remove these things at no cost to the company. That was my pitch line. And it came, the answer came back rather quickly, and it was no. We're cleaning this stuff out. These things are all microfilmed. Nobody needs this information. Nobody wants it. And basically, they were saying, we don't want to bother with this now. I mean, we had a 3.5 million square foot plant that they were trying to clean out, and I get it. They didn't have time to mess with me. So like any good 3-year-old, when daddy says no, you go to mommy. So I kept probing around, trying to find somebody, that had some influence and could somehow salvage these drawings. And I just totally drew a blank. I couldn't find anybody in management or anything that I knew, that I had connections with that was willing to stick out their neck and try to save these things. So I had pretty much given up on it, and they just continued pulling drawings in the vault, and the ones that were destined for the fire they kept storing in a room down near the vault. Really, actually, a couple different rooms. And like I say, I had pretty much given up on it. And then a fortuitous disaster occurred. And if you can go to the next slide, you will see that the room where these drawings were being stored, or the rooms, somehow had a major water main break in it, and these rooms filled up with water. So all these drawings that were neatly stored in there turned into this big sloppy mess. And you can see from the cracked cement block wall in the background that water must have gotten pretty high in there. But that's what we were left with. And like I say, there were 2 or 3 rooms that looked just like that, with all these wet, sloppy drawings sitting there. So I wasn't sure exactly what was going to happen, but I didn't have much hopes that anything good was going to happen from that point on. And the people in charge of the clean out, they shoveled them out of these rooms, and in the picture on the right, you can see they shoveled them into a big pile on the floor of the manufacturing area, and just left them sit there for 2 weeks. And I wasn't sure what was going on. I hadn't heard anything, but at the end of about 2 weeks, I got the call that I had hoped for much earlier, but I got the call that, hey, those drawings that you wanted, well, they're all wet now, but if you want them, you can have them. And they said the only caveat was, if you ever dispose of them, we don't want to see them blowing around a landfill someplace. Dispose of them discreetly if you ever dispose of them. And I said, that's fine. I'm in. I'm all in. And there was a bonus. If you see in that picture on the right there, you see like 3 wooden crates there. They actually had like 35 wooden crates full of drawings that had not been in the flood. They were going to be disposed of eventually anyhow. They were not production drawings, but they were what they called non-current drawings, which may have been like obsolete versions of production drawings, test drawings, proposals, layouts, things of that sort. And if I wanted them, I could have that too. So I said, great, I'll take them. So I rented a truck and hired a young man that I knew, and the 2 of us went in there and moved all the drawings, wet and dry, crated, uncrated, moved them in a truck to a barn. And you can slip to the next drawing or the next slide.
Yeah. So when you were digging these out and getting them in the truck and moving them and everything, what were you thinking you would eventually do with them? I mean, your initial thought had to be, well, first they have to dry, but
well, I'll be totally, when I first heard about these things and started thinking about it, I thought these would really be valuable for restorers.
Yeah.
In addition to the idea that they had a historical value. But as things went along and I found out that, yeah, there were microfilms out there, for everybody, I kind of, I don't know, I began to think, well, maybe the restorers really don't need these things at all. And I was thinking more, well, the historical value certainly is there. And honestly, some of these I consider beautiful drawings. And I think Esther's probably seen a lot of them that I'm talking about. The 3-view drawings, the inboard profiles, the perspective views, and so on. I consider them aviation art too. And so I was leaning more toward the historical and aviation art for the value of these things. But in any event, I knew they had to be saved. That was a no-brainer. So we moved them to the barn, and you can see me in the barn there, just with piles of drawings everywhere, and they don't look very pretty. Like I say, they had been wet, and I think the water main that broke must have been underground because there was a lot of mud all over the drawings. And from shoveling around probably and everything, you can see they don't look that great. But the remarkable thing was that most of the drawings were done with pencil on engineering vellum. And it turns out that engineering vellum is a pretty resilient material. And once I got them dried out and unrolled them and so on, they were really in pretty decent, usable shape at least. There were some exceptions. Some of the drawings were done on what we called silk. It was really a starched linen that they did ink on these drawings. And the 2 weeks that they sat in the wet pile was not kind to the starched linen, because it molded terribly, and just those drawings basically dissolved and sometimes damaged paper drawings that were next to them. And there were some photocopies on a celluloid, and the emulsion on those washed off and got on other things. So it wasn't all pretty, and there was some triage to the whole process, but for the most part, you can see most of them are the paper drawings that to this day are still pretty good and usable, and I think Ester will attest to that. So yeah, there they were. I worked on those things for like 3 months, and at the end of that 3 months, they closed the Columbus plant that I mentioned. My boss, who had moved to Los Angeles, said, "Hey, I got a place out here. You can come and work for me for a while." So I spent about 8 or 9 months out on the West Coast working in their Master Dimensions group before I came back and got back to looking at these things. And honestly, they, I had hopes of maybe selling them or, doing something useful or maybe profitable with them. And I kind of poked around at it for a while, but didn't hit it real hard. What I did do was I spent time cataloging these things and making up spreadsheets with the parts and that were on the drawings and the descriptions and so on. So I kind of, pittered around with them for a while, but never did a whole lot. And continued with some of those things off and on for quite a number of years. And after about 30 years, about 2018, after having these things stored, they were originally stored in a storage place in my home in Columbus. And when we moved to Cincinnati, I moved them to my hangar and then my home in Cincinnati. And that's the pictures you're seeing here, where they sat for quite a while. So yeah, at around 2018, after about the 30-year mark, I decided I really got to do something serious about these things. So one of the first things was I had somebody that had connections at a local museum called the Tri-State Warbird Museum, which is near Cincinnati, and I actually gathered up some of the drawings and made a presentation down there, and there was people were interested. I mean, the guys there loved seeing these things, especially the guys that worked in the shop restoring these airplanes were quite interested, but no real leads on disposing of the drawings. And a few months went by, and I got an email from some people in Minnesota, of all places, and they said they were interested in seeing the drawings. And well, I'll tell you what, maybe I'll turn the monologue over to one of those people from Minnesota right now, and that would be Ester. She was the one who contacted me by email initially to talk about the drawings.
Yeah, that was that is the transition point in the story. I mean, Ken is not wrong. Obviously, AirCorps, we do warbird restorations. That's our main business, and all of the work that we do is based off of the digitized microfilm of the drawings that are fairly widely available, and so that's what we're very familiar with. That's the part of the business that I manage, all of our engineering data. And I had never seen an original engineering drawing prior to getting involved with Ken. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I've got an original drawing," and then you see it and it's just a printout of a drawing that was originally on microfilm. And so I had heard from Noah at the Tri-State Warbird Museum, this gentleman came in and he had some actual original drawings and you should reach out to him. And so I did. And Ken and I nerded out for about 2 hours talking about North American's engineering history and part numbering systems. And I was really excited. And And I convinced.
I love that kind of talk, by the way.
So do I. Yeah, it was great. But somehow I convinced him to send a total stranger a sampling of the drawings because I was really curious. I just wanted to see, he obviously told me the story about what had happened with the flood, and I was curious to know what condition the drawings were in. And so he sent me 14 drawings rolled up in a tube and kind of that ran the gamut. Something really nice that was not really water damaged at all to something that was in questionable condition. And this visual here that you guys are seeing is one of my favorite ways to illustrate kind of when the light bulb went off for us about what Ken's collection actually was. So this is the drawing for the P-51D throttle quadrant, and the image on the left is what we are used to seeing on microfilm. It's a very unstable media. It gets dark, it gets light, it gets scratched. Sometimes it was blurry when the original photo was taken. There's so many things that can go wrong with it. And so this version on microfilm here is actually the latest revision drawing that we had for that. And all of a sudden I get this tube in the mail and I unroll the drawing and it was this original drawing. And I am not ashamed to admit that a tear may or may not have come to my eye. It was kind of, it was, truly a light bulb moment. My mouth was probably gaping open. And essentially from that moment on, I sort of made it my mission. I knew I wanted to be involved in this and kind of help Ken make a plan for how to move forward with the drawings and learn from him what his goals were for the collection and what he wanted to do with it. So pretty shortly after receiving that tube, it couldn't have been more than 2 weeks. Myself and our general manager, Eric, flew to Ohio to meet Ken in person and see the collection. And these are a couple photos of us in Ken's basement, looking through some of the stuff. Ken did not tell you, but his favorite airplane was the B-25. And so he cherry-picked a lot of the really great B-25 drawings and had those in his house, not at the hangar. And so the image there of me and Ken rolling out this very, very long drawing of the B-25 nose, or is it the tail gun? It's the tail gun. And so we just kind of spent a couple days going through his house and his hangar and just being completely blown away with this literal treasure trove that was somehow just in a private collection in central Ohio. And this other photo here, Ken can tell a little bit about it. This wasn't specifically from North American, but he has all this other really great memorabilia, this tow target flag, or kite there, and there was tons of manuals, obviously engineering manuals that he also got from the factory. It was a really incredible amount of information that we found. And so that was kind of the impetus for making some plans. And, Ken said that he had thought about maybe selling some of the drawings, and I was probably annoyingly adamant that the collection should stay as a collection. It should stay as a group.
That message came across loud and clear. Both Noah from Tri-State Warbird Museum and Esther both had the same reaction to that brilliant idea of mine of selling them off one by one. And they let me know right away, and I shaped up. I
Yeah, it's seeing them in their bulk is really impressive, and obviously it tells a much larger story about the history, what was going on behind the scenes at North American during World War II. So that was really my goal there. And so we kind of went back and forth, probably for about a year, kind of learning from Ken about what his true goals were, what he wanted to see with the collection. And the main thing that he wanted was for as many people to enjoy the drawings as possible. Obviously, he spent 31 years puttering around with them, looking through them, cataloging them, and that's what he wanted for other people to kind of experience them as art or as engineers who were interested in that aviation engineering heritage. And so in 2019, we came to an agreement with Ken, and essentially AirCorps became the new caretakers of this collection that he had saved. And of course, in honor of him, we called it the Ken Jungeberg Collection, logically. And we brought it back to Bemidji very smartly in late December, middle of winter. And we rented a building to put everything in, because if anybody is listening has ever been to a restoration shop, you know that space is always at a premium, and there was no way that I was going to be able to have the space that I needed to start sorting all of these materials in the shop. So we rented a building, and I think this is the next, we got this time-lapse video here of me essentially having 2 cups of coffee in the morning instead of 1 cup of coffee.
So this is you unloading part of the collection and trying to get everything organized.
Yeah, so this was, we'd unloaded everything into this one room.
Ken, you had these, in you said in your house, in your basement, for 30 some years. What did your wife think about this?
She is a good woman. That's all I can say. She put up with it. She truly did. In a good way.
So basically what I was doing in this scenario is I just opened the first box in the pile and started pulling drawings out. And the great thing about one of the many great things about North American is that they have a really amazing part numbering system that essentially catalogs drawings on its own. So I didn't have to come up with a system of how to organize the drawings. It was basically already done for me. And a lot of people came into the archive room at this point and they were like, how do you even begin to do something like this? People are just kind of flabbergasted at the scope of work that it takes, but it's a very methodical, maybe I miss my calling as being an engineer, I'm not sure, but it makes complete sense to me. So what I was doing was I would just pull out a stack of drawings and at a high level sort everything by the part number prefix, which essentially tells you what aircraft that drawing was originally drawn for, even if it was used interchangeably later on other aircraft. So I started making these piles by the part number prefix, putting everything in numerical order in that way. And then all the drawings are kind of standard sizes also. They've got A, B, C, D, and G size, as Ken calls them, cut size drawings. So anything from 8.5 by 11 to 33 by 40. So I would make little piles of those, so by prefix and then by size within that prefix. And then I did that for every single drawing in all of those crates and all of those boxes. And then I started going back through those stacks of prefix drawings and putting them in numerical order. So that was kind of how I got started with that. And the putting things in numerical order by the suffix of the part number took a little bit longer, but essentially that's kind of how the cataloging progressed. And I found a program that was really great for entering all of these drawings into it. So at this point, I'm cataloging the part number, the title on the drawing, which is actually really important because a lot of the drawings in Ken's collection, we were really surprised to learn were experimental drawings or non-production drawings. So things that never made it into a parts catalog, nobody even really knew that they existed, which I think is one of the interesting things about, Ken mentioned that North American as a company was going to burn these drawings, and they were burning them because they were, quote, on microfilm and everyone had access to them. But in reality, after doing this kind of initial inventory, I would say that probably 30%, 40% of the drawings that are in this collection fit into that experimental category, and were things that probably the people who made the decision to burn the drawings didn't even know existed at all. So that's been a really fascinating part of this project is to kind of find again this treasure trove of things that have legitimately never been seen by anyone outside of a North American employee before. That's really the humbling experience for me.
Plus, I think you found that the drawings that were made for foreign sales, like the British markings drawing, for instance, apparently that was never it was never microfilm, correct?
Yeah. There's some specific examples like that. There was a gentleman who was writing a book about the British markings on the Mustang, and he had been looking for this specific drawing for years, 10, 15 years, and parts of the drawing had been either photographed or copied and put in manuals, but never the entire drawing itself. And it was definitely not put on the microfilm. And that was a drawing that I happened across in some of my in my catalogings. And so it's really fascinating to go through this step, one, because I feel very humbled because I'm the first non-North American employee to ever touch any of these drawings. I can't count Ken because he was obviously a North American employee. So it's a really amazing experience, and it makes you feel very, very close to the people who created the drawings initially, which is actually, I think that's the next slide. It's become one of my passion projects to learn more about who these engineers were as people and the role that they played in the war effort. I think that's a very important story to tell. In my opinion, the engineers and specifically the draftsmen are a very underappreciated, overlooked group of people who in reality contributed to the war effort in this amazingly huge way. We talk a lot about, people like Dutch Kindleberger and the people at a higher level in a company who were designing the airplanes, the face of these corporations. But people like these two gentlemen here, Fred and Clyde, kind of flew under the radar. And Ken, I feel like he's a typical engineer. I feel like all engineers, I joke to say that they're the same person in a different body. They're all very humble, so modest, never bragging about the work that they do behind the scenes. And I think that's one of the reasons that they have been overlooked. And so Fred has a really neat story. He was the first draftsman who I was able to find a family member connection with. I got to talk to his son several times, and Fred was part of the initial design team for the P-51, so he was one of the, I think it was less than 20 people that were chosen to work on that initial design of the Mustang in that 120-day period that they told the government that they were going to design and build one, and they did. And so Fred and the rest of his team ate, slept at the factory. They didn't go home. His son, whose name was also Fred, said that he didn't really see his dad during that time period. But Fred worked for the company for his entire career until he retired, and worked on a wide variety of projects. And similar story with Clyde Maulding. I was able to get in contact with his son and daughter and talk to them pretty extensively. And Clyde, he maybe worked at one other company for a couple of months before going to North American, but then, stayed his entire career in engineering, worked on the space program. And the neat thing about Clyde is that he is the one who drew the drawing right below him is for the rudder pedal that was used on every World War II model of airplane that North American produced. So T-6, P-51, B-25, all of those aircraft use that rudder pedal that Clyde designed. And I think that that's just such a neat thing. I wrote a blog about it a couple of months ago, or maybe it was an article for NATA about how all of these Warbird pilots, right? Like you have this big, cool airplane, and there's no argument about the flying completed airplane is so cool. But when you start to get down into these individual parts, I mean, a rudder pedal is just a piece of metal, right? but there's this guy behind it who sat at a desk and put his, expertise and his heart and soul into drawing this drawing, and to see a picture of him next to it, to me, lends a new meaning to that part. And the article was sort of bent towards that idea. Like, the next time you get into that airplane and you put your foot on that pedal, like, you should think about Clyde and his contribution to that airplane and to the overall war effort.
And I must say, I totally appreciate your heart for these draftsmen and trying to put them in a place of honor for the work that they did. That really was a huge contribution to the war effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had this sort of sneaking suspicion that some of these guys felt a little bit of guilt for not serving in active duty. And one of the other, the son of one of the draftsmen that I got to meet last summer, he said that was very true. His dad did feel guilty. His uncle, or his dad's younger brother, served in active duty, and his dad always felt a little bit of shame about not contributing in that way. And so one of the reasons, as we move on to the next slide, I wanted to create an exhibit to honor the draftsmen and tell their story. And obviously a lot of these people are gone now, or sort of a little bit too far removed, but even if it's, beyond the grave, I think that it's really important to talk about this contribution. And also, specifically for young people, I mean, Ken was there during the transition from the drafting board to CAD, and now we're so far removed from that having young people go into an exhibit and see a drawing that someone drew by hand, which is art. And I mean, CAD is cool, but there isn't, even if you do CAD for a living, I think you would admit that there isn't, there's no art to it. Where doing it on the drafting table, putting your pencil to the paper is art, even if what you're producing is something incredibly technical, like an individual, cotter pin or something like that. But all of those drawings really can be appreciated. And so I put this exhibit together, and it's currently at the EAA Museum in Oshkosh, and it'll be there through this fall, and then it'll move on to the Military Aviation Museum in Virginia Beach as its next stop. But I really wanted to tell that story and bring it home and have people in modern life interface with these drawings, which is really what Ken wanted. He wanted people to enjoy them, and I did try to cherry pick some of the really great drawings from his collection to put in this exhibit. But just to kind of get people's minds going about, even in modern life, if you're working as an engineer, I mean, there isn't anything that you can interact with in a day that's not, something outside of nature that somebody didn't design or think about or engineer. And it's such an interesting facet of our society, or at least I've become very interested in. It's incredibly nerdy, but I guess we're all nerds here, so that's probably fine.
Definitely.
Yeah, so that's kind of where things are right now. I'm continuing to catalog the drawings. I'm here. I've got some on my desk here right now. It's probably one of my favorite aspects of my job that I wish I had more time to spend on it, but it's a big project. One of the previous slides I estimated there's probably about 50,000 drawings that Ken ended up saving on that fortuitous day in 1988, and I feel very lucky to be the person who's the new caretaker and gets to take it on, hopefully for the next 30 plus years and even longer.
There you go. One question that, looking at this exhibit, and you see the drafting table. So a number of slides ago, we saw the very long drawing of the B-25. Ken, how did they do that? I mean, did they have drafting tables that were that large? Or I guess in my mind, all drafting tables kind of look like the one that we're looking at on the photo.
I think the standard drafting table is a little bit bigger than the one in the display there, but nonetheless, you just rolled up at both ends and kind of rolled and unrolled and worked on section at a time. Yeah, you obviously couldn't work on the whole thing at one time.
Well, and there are a few photos of World War II era where people are on the floor. They've got drawings rolled out on the floor and people are just laying on their stomachs. And I've seen a few photos of people like on a little cushioned wheeled device, you know, like you're working on a car, but you're laying on your stomach instead of on your back.
Crazy. Joel wanted to pass along this compliment to you, Ken. Your persistent effort to preserve these drawings is more than priceless. For aviation, it's like the Mona Lisa in every way. And I would agree with you. Thank you, Joel, for that.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's nice to hear somebody appreciate the drawings like that.
Yeah. And for Esther, not only are these drawings a showcase of the skill of the draftsman, but also their unique and artistic input. And I remember in our previous conversation, for the most part, these are very technical drawings, but some of those draftspeople had little marks or signatures or something that they kind of put their own personal spin on it.
Yeah, definitely. There were little ways. I mean, again, in my opinion, engineers are all they're a very similar personality type.
Yeah.
But every so often, you do get someone putting their stamp on the drawing. And actually, that was originally how I found Fred Prill, that first draftsman. Mm-hmm. He had a very specific way of signing his name. And obviously, Prill is not it's a pretty unique last name. But that was what caught my eye about those drawings, was his very specific signature. And sometimes people had a slight variation in the way that they, you know, wrote their lettering. I mean, engineering lettering is supposed to all look the same. You're not supposed to be able to pick one drawing out from another by who drew it. But they did slip in a few things here and there, little flourishes, which is pretty neat to see.
So we've been talking about the Ken's collection here throughout the hour, but let's maybe pause a little bit and move over to the AirCorps side. Can you give us a little peek under the tent of some of the things that are going on at AirCorps?
Oh man, yeah, it's busy. Which is great. It's amazing. Sometimes people are a little bit blown away that there's an industry in warbirds, right? I mean, everybody here listening in is very passionate about it, but from an outside observer, they're like, who is doing this work and how is it sustainable at all? But it's fascinating, and it's fantastic that there's people out there who see the value in these airplanes and are willing to continue to support private organizations like us and organizations like the CAF who maintain them and build them. But right now we've got, oh man, we just got started again on a project that is really cool to me. It's a P-51B called Shillelagh. It's got a really great story behind it. Two pilots who flew it. It crashed in France, and it's a really fantastic story. So that probably, I forget, in the next 2 years maybe, we'll have that one back to airworthy status. We've got our long-time AT-10, Beechcraft AT-10 project that we've been working on for quite some time, which continues on. That's definitely made some good progress in the last year. We're working on a P-38J, Wandina, for the Wartime History Museum. Currently, that's kind of been like early to mid stages. And then we've also been helping I want to say Dixie Wing, but it's Air Base Georgia now, right? We are doing some work with Air Base Georgia on their P-47N and helping them out a little bit with that. We've got a Piper L4, a smaller project for us that we're working on, and a few other random things. We've been doing a little bit more with Stearman's lately because we purchased the dusters and sprayers Stearman parts inventory. I think they have the largest Stearman inventory in the world, and we bought that. Was it this year or was it last year? No, I guess it was last year. Now we're in 2025. So we've been doing some more Stearman stuff, which is really great. We did a Stearman restoration back in the day, the Bush Stearman. So we're definitely familiar, but now we have this big inventory of parts, and so we've been getting into that a little bit and have kind of a personal, like, internal shop project for the Stearman. So lots of things going on.
Busy in Bemidji, as they say, right?
Yes.
Ken, what is ahead for you? I mean, what do you see yourself doing in the next 6 months or next year?
Well, there are a couple things on my bucket list, and I'm hoping that someday we can get to them. I would definitely like to look through, or have somebody look through the material that went from North American to Boeing when they purchased North American and the aerospace stuff. And I'm hoping that somebody can come up with the master dimensions handbooks for some of these World War II airplanes. I don't think they exist anywhere. Once again, there's kind of like pages here and there that exist, but to have those master dimensions handbooks, you could make a completely accurate digital model of all these airplanes, and you don't have to reverse anything as far as the outer surface, the shape of the airplane. I'd like to see a digital model of these airplanes created, the outer shape. And I'd like to be a part of that, in fact, because that's what I did in the Master Dimensions group.
Yeah. Without those master dimensions, you can't. I mean, you have to essentially reverse engineer all the curves of the airplane, and having that data. It was Ken and I have discussed this a lot. We think it was more highly classified, even than the engineering drawings in the factory, because if that information, just that information, got into the hands, of somebody that it shouldn't, it's the piece of the puzzle that allows you to recreate the airplane in exacting detail.
Yeah, but if there's anybody out there that's got a Master Dimensions handbook from World War II era, I think the restoration community could really benefit from that.
Yeah. It's great. A lot of comments just coming through, like this one from Bill. It said, this is really an amazing effort to save a true treasure for the Warbird community. And Bill, I'm just going to add on to that, not just the Warbird community, but the history of World War II. It reaches beyond just the airplane people. It really is a time, or a snapshot of history, and not only of history, but also of the talent and the effort that the draftsmen went through to do this in the during World War II. It was, as you said, Ken, you were in the transition period between doing it on paper and pencil and to the CAD drawings, but there's just something about the actual drawings that just sort of bring it to life more than what would be on a computer screen.
Very true. Very true.
I call it technical
personal touch.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Esther. What did you say?
No, go ahead.
No, I'm saying that just to know, like you said, just to hold one of these drawings in your hand and know that 75 or 80 years ago somebody drew this and put their hand to it, and the significance that it really played in the war effort, to me, that's very meaningful.
Yeah. Ken, did you have any exposure to the Navion, the L-17?
No, not at all, to be honest with you.
And that didn't end up in the drawings that you have in your collection, the Navion?
No, really. I mean, like Ken mentioned, it does sort of taper off around the T-28. Because again, in the factory, they were essentially categorizing things as current and non-current. Mm-hmm. So in '88, when some of these things were either on the drafting board again, so to speak, or still in active duty, those things, I think, were what Ken mentioned, are things that got sent back to California and didn't. Who knows what happened to them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one airplane that didn't make it to Columbus,
Yeah. And Kevin from the B-25, history project was very complimentary as well. Ken, thank you for saving all the drawings that helped them in their restoration. And Esther, thanks for allowing them to come up and letting them go through the collection to help restore the gun nose on their B-25. So, we've got examples of things that have already taken place through this collection. Also, the simulator and gaming industry is moving ever closer to accurate high-fidelity 3D models. And Joel was saying that these drawings should probably help increase the competition for high-fidelity games. So it's and it's something that he's involved in as well.
Yeah, no, surprisingly, on the AirCorps Library website, that's a question that I get a lot. A lot of people doing simulators and wanting to dig into the engineering data to make their sim look as absolutely perfect as they can, which is very cool. I'm always amazed how people are using this data. And like you said, Steve, it's not just this really niche aircraft restoration community. It's much broader than that. I mean, who doesn't love World War II aircraft?
Right.
Like, you don't have to be really passionate about it to think these airplanes are amazing. So there's lots of applicability.
They certainly are. And how, Esther, how can people keep track of what you are up to and what AirCorps is taking care of and restoring these days? You've got a newsletter, right?
We do, yeah. We have multiple newsletters depending on what you're interested. We have our main AirCorps one on aircorpsaviation.com. You can sign up for that. We have project pages that are way too in-depth about all of our projects. We write monthly project updates. Our historian writes those about what we're working on. We've got tons of photos. And then my side with the AirCorps Library, I've got my own newsletter about all the new drawings and manuals that we're adding to the site every month. We've got our AirCorps Depot website where we sell parts, and I feel like we've got a little bit of something for everything. We're like a one-stop shop when it comes to Warbird related things. So yeah, newsletters are good. You can sign up on the website, and we've got blogs on all of our pages about all the different things that we're doing. So yeah, plenty of ways to learn.
Sounds good. Any data on the B-25K radar trainer that's in the collection?
Wow, that a K model?
Yeah.
And what's the part number prefix for a K model? Quiz.
Doesn't even sound familiar to me, tell you the truth.
I wonder. I'm going to move my computer here, but that's a good question. That would be something to email me about, because I can look up. I've got a list of all the prefixes and what they go to. But that could be something. I mean, if it was a one-off or something really specific, sometimes the drawings are in a prefix that has like a letter after it, and they are in their own category. And I haven't really started digging too much into the B-25 drawings yet. I'm sort of wrapping up with the Mustang stuff. B-25 is next. So
now, I think I've mentioned this to Esther, but it seems to me I remember seeing some B-25 modification drawings for Eisenhower's Hack, his personal airplane that was modified for him during the war.
Yeah, I'm sure there's all kinds of crazy stuff in there. I wrote an article, I think that was all maybe for NATA also, about the tailhook modification on the B-25. We have those drawings in Ken's collection. So people, and for the Mustang also, so the people who say that that wasn't something that North America was planning for, they absolutely were, because there are engineering drawings for that entire assembly. So yeah, war just ended too soon. Or not soon enough, depending on how you think. Yeah.
So there you go, David. Get a hold of Esther and see if she can find some B-25K drawings for you. And the rest of us will be interested to see that as well.
Right.
Well, thank you so very much for spending time with us tonight, Ken and Esther. It's really a privilege to be able to kind of peel back the layers on this collection. As many of our viewers have said, it's really somebody said the Mona Lisa of Warbird drawings, and it really has been a boon to the community. And Ken, thank you for taking care of them for all these years. And Esther, good luck on cataloging everything that's in the collection.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Yeah, and thank you, all of those of you who have joined us tonight. We'd love to hear your thoughts on tonight's episode or any ideas you have for future topics. Feel free. You can just drop us a line at media@cafhq.org. Remember, if you like tonight's show, please share it across your social media platforms. We do appreciate it. And if you are a Warbird Tube subscriber on YouTube, make sure you click that bell icon. You'll get notifications when our new episodes are posted. Until next time, I'm Steve Buss, wishing you blue skies and tailwinds. Have a great night.